Welcome to Gothcast. This is episode 15. I am Dr. Sanders.
And this is Robbie Gore.
And today we're going to be taking a look at Siouxsie and the Banshees yet again.
Yep.
Yeah, we're basically going to do the next 4 albums. In our first part, we did their albums, from The Scream to Juju. This time we're going to be doing A Kiss in the Dreamhouse, Hyeana, Tinderbox, and Through the Looking Glass.
This is really where Siouxsie and the Banshees' career kind of starts to take off from this point forward. Mm-hmm. And part of that, I would say, is partly due to them touring with The Cure and Robert Smith touring with them. And
yeah, I think there was a lot of different things happening at this time. And this was really when a lot of these bands were coming to prominence and being played a lot. Like Bauhaus was, by this point, pretty damn popular.
They had already pretty much secured their place in history at that point.
Exactly. And so, even A Kiss in the Dreamhouse, when that comes out, it's 1982.
Yep.
So it's kind of right when all these really, really big albums are coming out for the scene, and they would go on to be influential in it for the next decade.
Yep.
If you didn't listen to our other part, we really recommend that because it's basically a lot of what we're going to say is obviously going to be referencing their earlier kind of sound. And especially I feel with these albums, they really have a defined sound already.
Yeah. We saw a little bit of that with Kaleidoscope and Juju.
Yeah.
But we really see a development and a really coming together of structure and picture sonically and dimensionally for this band.
Yeah, definitely. And that's what I like about these albums. And that's also what kind of makes these albums hard to differentiate.
Yeah.
I know a lot of people who kind of just prefer to listen to like Juju or Kaleidoscope and maybe pick one of these albums that they have a favorite of, just because these do have a little bit more of a similarity than their earlier work, which
they do
tended to vary pretty greatly from release to release.
Yeah, I would say that these albums are much more consistent in their creation.
Yeah.
However, I would say that they're different enough that I feel like we can make some pretty interesting comments about the way these albums are created and how they relate to their past work and what's going to be coming up.
Yeah. So first we're going to talk about A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. So it's 1982, and they were hot off the heels on Juju. And this album, it's much less abrasive than what they had been doing.
No, definitely. So Juju is the first album where they really kind of embrace the double track vocals kind of thing and a higher level of production in the studio. And we see that expand further with this album. So we see them use strings for the first time on an album. Yep. And we have also them using recorder. That's the flute-like instrument for those of you who don't know.
It kind of sticks out whenever you listen to it.
And there's some piano on here as well. And there's a music journalist, Julian Marszalek of The Quietus, who noted on this album, Siouxsie and the Banshees really kind of became this big figure of, more so than goth, they became a figure of psychedelia.
Yeah, we talked, especially when we did the Cure segments, we talked about how the 70s psychedelia really influenced these kind of bands.
Yeah.
And this is definitely pretty true that there is some psychedelic influences in this type of music, just especially because people are working with longer type of songs. You're not trying to do the 2-minute songs. You're trying, a lot of times they're like 6 minutes.
Yep. Find very interesting uses of instruments throughout songs.
Yeah, a lot of like sitar kind of stuff and everything. And while Siouxsie and the Banshees doesn't have like a ton of that kind of stuff, The Cure actually have more like sitar and kind of Eastern kind of stuff.
They do, but for me, Siouxsie almost has more of kind of a psychedelic feel to it because Robert Smith is so much more like straightforward, diatonic, melodic based than Siouxsie and the Banshees are. Mm-hmm. Siouxsie and the Banshees are much less afraid to go into... I run the risk of being too clinical here, but I was going to say you get into those Phrygian scales and those harmonic minor tonalities.
Yeah. Well, I think also there's a big difference in songwriting between the two bands, because I know a lot of people really see Siouxsie and the Banshees as the female Cure.
Yeah.
But the more the bands evolve, the further away they get from each other.
No, I completely agree. And I can see some of those differences at the beginning, perhaps when they first have their kind of success. Mm-hmm. But, as like you say, as time goes on, they really, I feel like, kind of move in different directions. And immediately, even with just these albums, I start seeing what's going to be separations for them.
Yep.
Especially in terms of mixing.
Yeah. we're going to talk more about that when we do the album Hyeana, because Robert Smith is actually on that album. But let's go on to Kiss in the Dreamhouse. And so right in the beginning, the opening Cascade, I really like this song. In fact, one of the things I want to say right off the bat for this album is because of the introduction of strings and kind of more acoustic guitars and like 12-string guitars and different like flutes and things like that.
Yeah.
You have a much more theatrical album, much more like a kind of fairy tale sort of sound to everything. It kind of has this sort of like mystical quality. And it's throughout the whole thing, not just like one song encapsulates that and then the next one's like a rock song, you know?
Yeah.
That the entire thing kind of has that kind of otherworldly sort of fun theatrical sound to it.
Yeah, it definitely does. One thing they really do well on this album is demonstrate their creativity, both as a band, as creators, and in the studio. And so on tons of tracks, we're going to see their ability to portray almost image-like quality through sound, which really is a talent. But I will say, for me, their songwriting skills on this album didn't particularly pique my interest. And I don't mean in terms of experimentation or in terms of willingness to try new things, but just from the standpoint that nothing on this album to me is strongly melodic or harmonic in any way.
I guess. I mean, I kind of agree with that. I do think that the arrangements kind of lend themselves to more. Yeah, that they could have done more with it. But I think they did find a perfect balance here between keeping a sparseness and kind of making, you know, the choruses or things bigger. And I think that that's actually kind of what I like about this one, is that it didn't get so ridiculous with, because they could have gone like full on symphony kind of thing.
Well, I'm not talking about arrangement specifically. Mm-hmm. I'm more really talking about song composition.
Yeah.
And for me, these songs are, although they're very soft, perhaps in timbre, or they build when you get to a certain spot.
Yeah.
Just the melodies for the chord progressions themselves are very, for me, kind of like disharmonious. Like, I feel like the melodies, for me, don't mesh super well with the chord progressions that are going on. I kind of
disagree. I'll just leave it at that.
Yeah.
But there are a lot of songs I really like on this album. In fact, I actually like most of the songs on this album. I'll just go over some of the things that I noted here. So, Green Fingers, I really like that song. It's really catchy. You know, it sort of introduces the really, really layered sound that we get with a lot of this album.
Yeah.
And the song Obsession, that's kind of where the theatrical, so this is where I really noticed that the songs were really theatrical, because it has this kind of like slow, creepy kind of sound to it. It's kind of hard. Whenever Siouxsie and the Banshees do the sort of creepy, slower thing.
It's funny. The Obsession was like my least favorite song on this album.
That's your least favorite song on this album? Yeah, I would say that it's definitely not my least favorite song on this album. I can tell you that. But whenever they're doing the slow, creepy kind of songs, I feel like they never build fast enough.
This is what I mean by like
the composition.
The composition stuff is that I felt like a lot of the melodies that they were using for the vocals just kind of followed the chord progression, and I wanted a little bit more from them than that. And so when they got to some of these slower songs that didn't have particularly like pulsing chord progressions, I got kind of bored listening.
Yeah. Okay, I can see your point. She's a Carnival, super energetic. I really like the big sound on this one. And it builds. It's like slightly aggressive.
I like She's a Carnival a lot. That's probably one of my favorite songs of the album.
Really?
Yeah.
Not one of my favorites, but I definitely think it's a really good one. Probably my least favorite is Circle.
Yeah, I can't stand Circle.
Yeah. And that's mostly because of the keyboard part. I mean, it just loops again and again and again. Yep. And it's really repetitive. I don't know. I don't even see why that song was even included. Sorry. But then you have Melt, which uses ukuleles and things like that, and I really like it.
That's a really good song.
Or mandolins, mandolins on it.
Yeah.
And really, really, really like that song. You have Cocoon, which has become one of the fan favorites, which I am surprised by.
That's hands down my favorite song on the album.
Really?
Yeah.
Yeah, it has this kind of like noir sort of sound. Like, at least that's what it makes me picture, is like somebody sneaking in like a noir movie.
Yeah. Because
the bass line's like really pronounced. Mm-hmm. I really like it. So Painted Bird, that's actually what I think is probably the most modern sounding song on this. And on Juju we have Monitor, which I think like that totally stands up today as a very, very modern sort of sound. And for this one, Painted Bird I think is another one of the songs that they did in the 80s that still sounds very modern just because of the way it's layered, the way it's structured. I can just totally see somebody re-recording it and it being like a pop song.
I definitely agree. And that's one thing that I'll say about a lot of these albums is that if you compare Siouxsie and the Banshees to The Cure, and people see a lot of similarities between them, and I see a lot of similarities between them, but I will say that The Cure, at least in this, once they kind of get past this time frame, and then kind of from like,
because you got to think right now. So this album, really, Siouxsie and the Banshees had come into their sound on this album. I really think that this was one of like Juju. If you could just put a stepping stone right there, is like this is when Siouxsie and the Banshees is like the sound is getting really cemented.
Yeah.
With A Kiss in the Dreamhouse, this is like, I mean, they totally know what they're doing. And by this time, The Cure released Pornography.
Yep.
So in two totally different places. We're going to talk about it when we talk about Hyeana next. But they were totally in different places of where they're finding their sound.
I agree, because see, where I see the similarities between these albums to the Cure albums are kind of after Pornography. And so like, I feel like these albums line up more with stuff like The Head on the Door and things like that. And if I compare those releases, those albums, although I will say I kind of think are, for me, more masterpieces than like this album per se. I feel like this album is less dated than those ones are.
This album?
Yeah.
I totally agree with that. It's wearing less of its decade.
Yeah.
And that's totally a compliment to it, and definitely not bashing anything about
not
the
at
Gothic
all. That's
trilogy.
A huge compliment.
But I think that the fact that this can be remastered, like if you listen to even the original ones, it still really holds up, like the original like vinyl record.
Yep.
But then if you listen to the remastered ones, you could swear that it was recorded way later than that.
Yep.
Just because of the way that everything was done. And yeah, it's definitely sort of lines up more with the like later Cure albums than what actually was being released, like Pornography.
Yeah. In
terms of sound, just in case anybody wants to kind of compare these. But yeah, I think that they had found their sound by this point. I really do.
I agree.
Yeah, so this album is the last album with John McGeoch, and I just felt like even though he's not on any other album, that they were like, okay, we got it.
Yeah, like that's the sound of the band. Like any guitar player they hire, they're like, basically you got to sound like John McGeoch.
Yeah, that's like literally true. And I think that benefited them actually a lot. There aren't a ton of bands. Like there are bands now that sound like Siouxsie and the Banshees, but there wasn't a band that really sounded like this. Yeah, let's just say from here, they don't really mess with the formula that much.
Yeah.
Until later, obviously. But for
most
of the 80s.
Of this segment.
Yeah, for this episode, they don't really mess with the formula too much. So anything else you want to add to? Oh, I know one thing I want to add to this is the artwork for this album is awesome.
Oh, it's great. Actually, that's one thing that I'll say about like Siouxsie and the Banshees really shines on is artwork.
Yeah.
They don't release a whole lot of artwork that's terrible.
Yeah, I think the only one that I don't like is actually, I think it's Peep Show. And I know that's kind of like, a lot of people love that kind of image, but that's like the one I've had in my car forever.
Yeah.
And I just have never really liked the cover of that one, but we'll get to that album in the next episode. But yeah, for this one, this was when they even had like their whole look done and everything. It's pretty cool.
It's really funny if you read some of the trivia about this album. They really, really knew what they wanted when they went into the studio with this album, because they're quoted that Fireworks indicated the direction we wanted for the album. We wanted strings. John McGeoch wanted a machine, but Steve Severin and Siouxsie and the Banshees were like, no, we're going to have an orchestra play on the record. Like,
wow.
Yeah.
Oh, that's pretty crazy.
Yep.
Good. Yeah, that's definitely, it feels like that too. Like this feels like a very on point album. So, and for a band, I mean, think about it. They had 4 or 5 albums in at this point. Yeah, 5 albums in. I mean, that's crazy. Like,
well, it's funny. It's just because they had so much ambition. Like Steve Severin is quoted as saying that he wanted their music played by the Philharmonic Orchestra.
Oh wow. Yeah. Jesus. Yeah, that's some ambition, definitely. But yeah, I think that this is a great album. I think if you want to hear Siouxsie and the Banshees still kind of coming into their own, this and Juju are the 2 albums that I think you can hold up and go like, this was where they figured it out.
I think so.
I think Kaleidoscope too, obviously.
Kaleidoscope for me is the stepping stone, and for me, I'll say just my little 2 cents on it really quick. I think the Juju and A Kiss in the Dreamhouse are like two big pieces of the puzzle that get put together in the next albums that we're going to see.
Yeah.
And Juju for me is where all the strong songwriting is. And A Kiss in the Dreamhouse is where all the strong production and sound is.
Yeah.
And once those two things meet, Siouxsie and the Banshees are pretty much unstoppable.
Yeah. I really agree with that. In fact, I don't think I could have said it better myself. So that's A Kiss in the Dreamhouse. It's wholly recommended.
Yeah.
It's amazing. Okay, it's going to be our news segment. And we have a pretty interesting news story to start off here. And I think it's a really cool one because I love the book Dracula. It's probably my favorite book that's ever been released. And a first edition sold at an auction. It was basically an estate sale, and they found it in a box. And
It's usually how those things go.
yeah, so it was from 1897.
Yep.
And it sold for 5,300 pounds. So that's pretty crazy.
Yeah. That's almost like 8,000 US dollars.
Something like that, yeah. And yeah, so apparently this person had died, and they were going through all the books, and it was going to basically be, you know, like if they hadn't sorted through them all,
Yep.
they're basically just going to sell boxes of books.
Oh my God. Could you imagine if that had just been sold in a box of books?
Oh, man. Yeah. It's not perfect, of course. It can't be, basically, at this point.
It's a first edition from
But
1893.
it's surprisingly in good condition for how old it is.
Yeah.
Because they think it came from not like a library, but like a private book resource.
Yeah.
Kind of like, you know, like a hoity-toity library.
Yeah.
But yeah, it's a first edition. So before, I mean, usually the first editions for books that old,
Yep.
because people weren't really sure how many, you know, it was really hard to print books.
Yep.
So they would basically do a first run, and then if it was successful, then they would do 2 and 3. But usually there's only a couple hundred copies of the first one, and usually it circulates around a small area.
Yeah, and the first pressing usually has like some lame, just like there's nothing on the cover except for the title.
Yeah.
Because the company doesn't want to spend any money on it if it's not going to make money.
Yeah, and with this one, they said it's even before because before they used to put like the little ads in the back of them, in the back of books, and this has no ad space. It basically has the blank pages where it was going to be.
Yeah.
So that's how fresh this book was, and so $5,300. Like, I mean, probably $8,000. That's pretty crazy, and it was only appraised for like $1,000 or something, like $1,500.
Yeah.
But then like people apparently just kept bidding on it to get it up, and they wanted it to be, you know, the guy was like super, like, I have to have this.
I mean, if I had that much money to just blow on something, I'd probably be bidding on that.
Yeah, but it doesn't compare to the Frankenstein, like the first edition of Frankenstein.
Yeah.
Mary Shelley's Frankenstein had sold for 31,000 pounds a few years ago.
Well, the thing is that Mary Shelley will always be, I mean, as successful as Dracula is as a singular story, Mary Shelley is just such a bigger figure in the spectrum of literature that Frankenstein will always outsell Dracula.
Yeah, I'm not surprised. But I thought that was really cool. Like,
yeah.
I don't know. Those things are always good and bad. There's always the argument with those sort of things, like spending that much money on that book. It's like, it's the exact same text as you can get in any reprint of it. And people are always like, oh, the historical value of it. It reminds me of the argue about collecting paintings.
Yeah.
And so paintings back in the day when, you know, you couldn't really take a photo of a painting.
Yep.
What people would do is they would hire artists to come over, like say they bought like a Salvador Dali painting, right?
Yeah.
Actually painted by Salvador Dali. They would hire another painter to come in
and repaint
it and basically get like a replica of it so that their friends could have it.
Yep.
And that was super, super common back in the day. And so now we have literally hundreds of thousands of paintings that look exactly like these real paintings, you know, done by real artists from around the same time. So they're saying that like probably most of the paintings that are even in museums are probably like just
fakes.
Yeah. And so this is kind of what it reminds me of to some extent, where it's pretty much the same exact content. You're going to have the same book. I have like 5 copies of Dracula.
Yeah.
And yeah, it's and like I just wear them out.
Yeah. Well, it's one of those things where I will say, like, chances are you're probably not going to get your hands on a first pressing of Dracula in your lifetime.
No.
But I will say, having come from being an English major and being a huge book nerd, there's something about like owning not even necessarily a first edition, because first editions are just usually impossible to come by.
Mm-hmm.
But just like having like an older copy of a book, like there's something to having that smell to them that they have, and just actually having a hardcover book instead of paperbacks that we, mass produce today. I don't know. There's just, I guess it's kind of like the cheesy vinyl argument that everyone gives. It's like, it's never the same, listening
Do you think the first edition Kindles will ever be worth anything?
Oh, God.
This was the first .epub file on the first Kindle.
Well, I think we can pretty much reference the fact that the first Apple computers are not really worth that much. So
they're worth a lot. The first Apple, yeah, they're actually worth a lot, but that's because of the crazy collectors. It's going up, actually. It's pretty crazy. Like,
yeah, but now they are for years and years.
Yeah, for years. No, yeah, that's true. Yeah, just right now they are.
Yeah,
because people are into like Insta Tumblr and stuff, like taking photos. I don't know. It's really weird. I don't know why that stuff is so.
I'm pretty sure all that stuff is just gonna fall back into oblivion. No one will care about it.
Yeah, it's gonna crash.
Yep.
We'll see. But so yeah, that just happened. This vintage copy of Dracula.
Yeah.
Go tell me. And then what is our other news story of the day?
Well, our other news story is going to be about a movie. And so for those of you guys who know the Leica production company.
One of my favorites.
Yep. They do more movies like Coraline and Paranorman.
And the last one they did was Box Trolls.
Yeah. Box Trolls was the last one they did. But they have a new movie coming out. It's called Kubo and the Two Strings. Again, another 3D stop motion film. Mm-hmm. It's going to be directed by Travis Knight.
That's the same guy who owns Leica.
Yeah. And written by Mark Hames and Chris Butler. And it stars Art Parkinson, Matthew McConaughey, Charlize Theron, Rooney Mara, Ralph Fiennes, and Brenda Vaccaro.
Ralph Fiennes. That's Voldemort. That's the guy in Bruges, the the villain guy.
Good old Voldemort.
I'll blow my head off. I'll kill the kid.
But so the plot for this story is set in ancient Japan, where a young boy named Kubo cares for his mother in a village. Spirit from the past turns Kubo's life upside down by reigniting an age-old vendetta. Causes all sorts of havoc as gods and monsters chase Kubo, who, in order to survive, must locate a magical suit of armor once worn by his late father, a legendary samurai warrior. So this looks interesting to me because it kind of seems like it might be like almost where kind of anime films have been in the past, meeting the stop motion animation.
Yeah, one of the issues I've had with Leica's films, and I'm a huge fan of them. Henry Selick directed Coraline, the original one, and he of course directed Nightmare Before Christmas, James and the Giant Peach, Monkey Bone. Don't include that one though. But I felt like Coraline had a very good pacing about it. It wasn't a lot of things that weren't necessary. And in fact, I watched like the commentary and the making of it, and there was all these scenes that they actually animated very painstakingly.
Yeah.
And Henry Selick cut him out because he's like, it just wasn't working, thing.
Yep.
And I feel like, unfortunately, since he didn't direct Paranorman or Box Trolls, I feel like both of those films kind of suffer from that same kind of issue. And they don't really know how to gear them towards a certain audience. Like Coraline was marketed towards kids, and it's a perfect kind of movie for kids and adults.
Yeah, I would definitely agree with that.
Yeah, and Paranorman, while good, it definitely has a lot of issues where it's not able to relate to children in some ways.
Yeah.
And only adults are going to get certain things, and you don't have...
And it wasn't marketed properly at all.
No, not at all.
When it came out, like, no one was going to see Paranorman.
Yeah.
Like, it was kind of like an afterthought by, like, critics and fans.
Yeah, I just felt like that one, especially with the main character the way it was, it's a character that's much more understood by adults than it is by kids.
Yeah.
Kids just think, why is that guy weird? And they're not able to relate to the character in that way. And then with Box Trolls, I think the biggest problem with Box Trolls was the setting was cool, but, like, the way that the characters developed in that and the pacing was just all over the place. So I hope that this one they're able to resolve some of those issues. And if Travis Knight's directing it, like hopefully, they kind of find a middle ground there. Coraline was a very marketable film, right? You have very kind of like, chipper, like little girl who's going to go on an adventure. So it's like, it's very marketable to people.
Definitely.
Paranorman, they went a little bit off it, and you're just like, okay, like, so like less people want to go see it because it's not like it's more niche of a thing.
Yeah, it was definitely like geared towards a very specific audience.
Yeah, and I felt Box Trolls was marketed towards like really little kids.
Yep.
And then like that movie was not like, it was way too scary for them.
Yep.
And I feel like they just can't seem to find the right combination of like
they can't find
PR.
like a good yeah, it's funny. Music and film are such different mediums, and that like often things that critics will comment on, when they're reviewing albums, and things that we comment on when we're reviewing albums, is that you want bands to like be not necessarily niche, but like go for a specific sound and like really kind of like hone something. But it's really true that when you're releasing a movie that you want to be commercially successful, or even just critically successful, you really kind of have to be able to play the spectrum of your audience and not really cater to like a really niche group, unless you're going to ride on the fact that hopefully it'll become a cult classic or something.
Yeah, that's actually kind of one of the issues, I think, is almost the way that they're marketed is like that it is for all encompassing group of people, but these movies are not.
I know.
Like, yeah, and I think that they could easily tweak it. Like Coraline was a perfect thing like for everybody, but then I just feel like almost they're just moving farther away from it. And while I love their films, because I just can see why that like less and less of these people are seeing them. Yeah. So
I agree.
Or at least commenting on them. Like people go to see them and then I don't hear them talk about it. They're like, it was okay.
Yeah.
So,
but I am very interested to see what they do with Kubo and the Two Strings.
Yeah.
And I'm just very curious because it's set in Japan. If they will almost kind of make stop animation characters who look like anime characters.
We'll see, man. That'd be cool.
Yep.
So, if there's one thing I can say about all their movies, that they have a very unique look.
Yeah.
And freaking awesome.
I would agree with that.
So, there you go. Dracula and
Kubo.
Listen. All right, so we're going to be talking about Hyeana now. And this is arguably my favorite album from them. That may just be because my boy's on it. my man crush, Robert Smith, is on this album. It's the only album that he's on other than the Nocturne live album.
Yeah. You've been touring with the band.
Yeah.
And, well, the rest is history.
Yeah. So at this time, after The Cure done Pornography, they kind of had a rough patch where he wasn't sure. Like
he wasn't sure if they were going to keep doing The Cure.
Yeah, and so Simon Gallup and him, they had a falling out, and then he was like, I'm not too sure. So he started helping Siouxsie and the Banshees out and taking up guitar duties. And when he was touring with them, he said, okay, I want to have an album with you guys. I don't know how, basically, like, I don't know how long I'm going to be in the band, but I want to have, like, proof that I was in this band. And this is the result. And it's a little bit different than what they were doing. It definitely has his sort of influence on it.
It does. I see that a lot in the way they use instruments on the album. Definitely reminds me of Robert Smith and the way they're going to use instruments on later Cure albums.
Yeah.
Because these don't, again, really match up timeline-wise. It reminds me a lot of the way things on Head on the Door are going to kind of pan out, like, instrumentally.
Yeah, I actually really agree with that. In fact, when I first started, I couldn't hear that many similarities to their sound.
Yeah.
But listening to it again and looking to where, because if you listen to, say, the Top, because Top came out in this year too.
Yeah.
1984. It doesn't have a ton of a resemblance to that.
No. But the Top was just like a weird anomaly.
Yeah, exactly. But then a year later when he did The Head on the Door, there's definitely a resemblance to Hyeana and The Head on the Door.
Yep.
And you kind of see a little bit stripped back from the previous album, and almost it's kind of hard to explain. There is a more guitar here. Like almost every song has kind of a guitar in it.
There's a lot more that's physically present on this record. Guitars, and even like other instruments as well. But it feels more stripped down because of the mixing. And so they take most things down in the mix besides the vocals. And for me, that's really my only big complaint about this album, is that I really wanted, like, especially the guitars to be pushed forward, because there was a lot of interesting guitar work on this album that you just like were struggling to hear over other things that were happening.
Yeah.
And I was like, why? Like, I was just playing guitar.
Yeah, that is something I agree with, actually, is that the guitar is pushed pretty far back. In fact, everything is kind of pushed behind the vocals. And that really wasn't the case with their previous albums.
No, it wasn't.
A Kiss in the Dreamhouse definitely had a blend of the song, the actual instrumentation carrying you through the song, and then the vocals kind of adding to that. This one, a lot of the lifeline in this is through the vocals.
Yeah, I agree. However, I do feel like these would be stronger songs if they mix them differently. Not to say that they aren't strong songs now, but I feel like it could have been an even better album.
Yeah. I have to talk about some songs. But I do agree with that. I do definitely agree with that. While the mixing isn't bad, it just could have been a different album because of it.
Yeah.
And so, all right, let's start with Dazzle, the opening. And it's a good opening. Like, I really actually do like it. It's
not my favorite song on this record.
I think it's one of the longest songs on this album. It does have a very, very slow build-up.
It's the second longest. Blow the House Down's longest.
Oh, okay.
Yeah.
But then, so one of the longest songs on the album is the opener. And this is really where I think one of the changes from A Kiss in the Dreamhouse is present.
Yep.
Is because while this song does have strings and keyboards and, guitars, kind of like the last album did, this one almost takes it from that kind of theatrical sense and puts it more to like a storybook fairy tale kind of sound.
Yeah.
Almost like parts of this song, really kind of remind me of like a Disney kind of song, like with the way that she has the lyrics play off of the instruments.
Yeah.
And so it does have that theatrical nature, but it's almost is more playful and like storybook kind of sound. And that was one of the things I noticed about this one is, and we're going to notice even with the song like Take Me Back, like when it has the keyboard stuff, it's a much more playful kind of basic sound to it. And that's just one of the things I noticed. It's a less epic album.
It's not an epic in the sense, the true sense of the word.
Yeah.
So that's not to say that this isn't like a great album, but it's not this big, romantic, epic, momentous kind of sound to it. And although this is probably one of my favorite Siouxsie and the Banshees albums, like I always listen to it and I can never get past the mixing. I always wanted the mixing to have been done like it was for an epic, because I think it would have made this album like so much more than it is already.
Yeah, I could see that. I just love this album. It's like
I do too. It's just, I don't know. I like, especially when we get to the next album, it's so much easier to like listen to the songs and to pay attention to things because you're not having to ride solely on the vocals. Yeah. This album, like the vocals have to carry it 100%. And I highly admire that they were able to produce an album that did that. There are times when my ears want to take a break from the vocals and want to listen to other things in the songs, but the mixing really doesn't let you do that.
Okay. I disagree, but yeah, I agree. That you're able to make that statement. Going back to Take Me Back, I like this song. It's really, really basic, actually. It's just basically just keyboards and vocals and drums. I think there's some bass on there too, but if there's a guitar, it's not very pronounced. And I just really like the sound of that song. And it's really catchy, like the actual melody of the keyboard. But then by this point, they really kind of knew what sort of sound they were going for. So unfortunately with this one, especially with the way that the songs are very similarly mixed.
Except for Dear Prudence.
Yeah, well, that was added later. Like, I know. It was, It is on my copy of the album. Actually has it included on there. But I have the American pressing, so.
Yeah, I kind of feel like Dear Prudence is worth mentioning just because it's a U.S. release, yes. It's not the original UK release, but
it's so associated with
it came
this
out
album.
that year, and it's highly associated with this album. In fact, it's one of their biggest singles.
Yeah, at least today too. Like, it's just really, really associated with them. So yeah, it's a Beatles cover, and it's really good. I mean,
it's amazing.
Yeah. So
that's okay. That's why I always bring up the mixing with this album, is because that's on the U.S. release, and that's what I have. And I know we're technically reviewing the UK release, but I hear that song, and it's not like it was added in like way after the fact. Like it's the U.S. release for that year. So like they clearly could have mixed the album like that, but just didn't.
I see. It's your main driving point on this album, huh?
Yeah.
But yeah, it's just where I start to feel like a lot of the songs sort of sound a little similar. Maybe that's just because of the mixing and everything like that. But it's not to detract from any songs. Like, the songs aren't necessarily hurt by it.
No, and I don't want to seem like I'm bashing this album at all, because this really is one of their most solid releases. But yeah, they unfortunately do kind of get like, it gets hard to differentiate between songs and albums, and so when people bring up these albums with me, I have a hard time picking out which ones my favorites are, and which songs stand out to me on the albums.
One of the songs that I thought was really important to mention, because it just is a very unique kind of thing, and it is sort of like Dazzle in sort of its composition, or how like it's kind of like an epic. And so the song Belladonna. And so I don't like the opening part for it, that bass line, like I can't stand that opening for this. But it does have some parts I really like. It's kind of like I like the verses of that song. But then I don't like the choruses, like the Belladonna. I just don't like the way that sounds, and that sucks, because I like almost everything on this album, but that song in particular, like whenever I get to it, I basically move the needle to the next song,
Yeah, I could definitely could see why. That song, unfortunately, I feel like it's not as strong as the rest of these songs on this album.
Well, then Blow the House Down, I really, really like this song.
That's a great song. That's actually, I think, one of my favorites from the album.
It has those crazy flutes and everything, and it's like super aggressive and epic, and like a lot of people would classify some of their stuff as like influential to alternative rock. And I think that this one totally has like that sort of like quiet, loud, quiet sort of dynamic that a lot of like alternative rock bands would use later. Because while they did do choruses and verses, like verses like kind of average, and then they had the big choruses. For this song, especially for Blow the House Down, I really felt like the dynamic of that was, they focused more on that, like, hey, let's get kind of lower and kind of remove the instrumentation in the verses, and then just like really like make it super loud for these certain parts. And I really like that sort of thing.
I do too. I don't know, for me at least, when I was listening through this, it's definitely very apparent on that song, but I started seeing it happen more on the second half of the album. And I think that's kind of why I like the second half of the album more.
I actually like the first half of the album, I think, better.
Really?
Yeah. I think I listen to this album like all the time now. So, yeah, I pretty much like it all.
Well, yeah, it's all good. I don't know. But, yeah, we've always been representative of opposite musical tastes. So.
Yeah. The one thing I have to say about this album, and it's the one thing that I always have felt about it, and the only thing I don't like about it is the album art. I just have never liked the album art.
Really? I mean, it's not their best, but I
just never have liked it. I've tried to give it a shot a whole bunch of times, but I don't connect with this one, unfortunately.
I mean, I won't say it's bad album art, because I don't think that it is, but I could see you not necessarily connecting with it. It's just kind of this weird kaleidoscopy dragon looking thing.
Yeah. Yeah. I don't know why.
I will say I don't like the font for Hyeana on the album. That really bothers me.
So that's the only thing I don't like about this one. If you want to see quintessential looking Siouxsie and the Banshees, this is the video that you look up.
Oh, yeah.
And this is the one that most people will post pictures from and all this stuff, because they definitely had that sort of, big hair, like thick makeup sort of thing. So Yeah. Just check this one out. This is probably my favorite album,
You
even
just
though it's
have
flawed.
to listen to this.
Yeah, even though it does have its problems, like this is still what I think is one of their like most like pure releases.
No, I agree, and that's why I don't know, very careful about the way I make complaints about this album.
Yeah.
Because I don't want to detract people from listening to this album. I really think that people should listen to this album. It's one of their strongest releases. It really kind of cements the Siouxsie and the Banshees sound, and we have a lot of things like come into play here that weren't happening, on previous releases. I just happen to not be a huge fan of the mixing, but it's kind of trivial, I suppose, in the grand scheme of things.
I'm glad you realize that. All right, so that's Hyeana. All right, so now we're on to Tinderbox. This is 2 years later, and Robert Smith is no longer in the band.
Yep.
And this time we have a little bit more of an aggressive sort of sound. They're kind of going back to some of the earlier releases and kind of taking out a little more of the strings and kind of focusing more on kind of guitar rock.
Yeah, so this album, I gotta say, for these four, it's my favorite.
Yeah.
It's a tough call for me between Hyeana and this album, but I do like this album more, and I think it's kind of because it goes back to that a little bit. And I don't know, I just kind of like that sound for Siouxsie and the Banshees. Like, I really like Juju because it really was just kind of the straightforward, just 4-piece band kind of sound.
Yeah. And I will say, for this one, I really felt like it kind of returned to sort of a band sort of groovy feel that, not like groovy 70s music, but like more of a kind of jam feel.
Yeah.
Whereas on A Kiss in the Dreamhouse and Hyeana, I felt like that kind of feeling was really lost on those albums. And although the songwriting was maybe a little bit stronger in just a different direction, I feel like with Tinderbox, you really got that feeling back.
I agree.
And just right from the opening, Candyman, which is a lot of people's favorite song by them.
It's a good song.
Yeah, and just really energetic, very, very good guitar. I mean, like, I can't praise the guitar work on this enough because while they do center a lot of it kind of based on the drums, which, by the way, are amazing in every single album.
Oh, yeah.
I don't even really feel like I need to mention the drums for Siouxsie and the Banshees because they're always perfect.
Yeah.
But they do kind of push those two instruments to the forefront on this album, the guitar and the drums, for a lot of the songs, not every single one.
Yeah.
And I love the guitar work on it. In fact,
I do too.
Stuff like the Sweetest Chill, when they have piano and like the 12-string acoustic guitar kind of sound, it's such a powerful sound on this album. And there's a negative side to this, though, unfortunately. And I think that the way in which they compose the songs, like based on guitar and doing the kind of courses, a lot of the courses are done with kind of more melodic kind of guitars and piano kind of accents. And they do sound very similar. And that's my biggest complaint with this album.
Really?
Yeah.
I don't know. I mean, I see your point, but kind of disagree.
Okay.
Perhaps much the same you disagree
with Hyeana.
Yeah. Because, I don't know. I felt that more so about Kiss in the Dreamhouse. Just because, although those were all like these highly produced songs with complex structure, they all had very much the same complex structure. And yes, a lot of these songs are mixed very similarly and written very similarly. Yeah. But I felt like the melodies and the chord progressions of these songs really carried them. And for me, these songs stuck out in my head much more than songs off of Hyeana or the Dreamhouse album, just because, I don't know, there's just stronger melodic content.
Okay, I see your point.
Yeah.
I don't agree with it, but I see your point. I think one of the most popular songs on this album, if not the most popular song on this album, is Cities and Dust. And I can't disagree with that, man. This song is amazing.
It's not very often that the single is my favorite song in the album, but Cities and Dust, definitely my favorite song in this album.
It's just so unique. It doesn't sound like a lot of the songs, and that's one of the things that I really appreciate about this band is like whenever they have a more straightforward, like kind of rock album and stuff, they'll put these like random songs on here. Yeah. And that's why I think if we could go back a few albums to Kaleidoscope, that's one of the reasons I think I like Kaleidoscope so much more compared to these albums. It's because Kaleidoscope, I felt like
This album actually kind of reminded me of Kaleidoscope a little bit.
A little bit, but I felt like Kaleidoscope didn't have a formula.
It didn't.
And this is like really where...
For me, this is like a weird mixture of like Juju and Kaleidoscope, kind of.
Yeah. But this definitely shows that by Tinderbox, they just were sticking to a formula.
Yep.
And you basically just can say, how did they do this formula a little different? And I think that the biggest standout track on here for saying, they're kind of breaking out of that, that sound a little bit.
Yeah.
Is Cities and Dust, where they're kind of just experimenting a little bit more. Where with Hyeana and A Kiss in the Dreamhouse, even Juju, they just kind of had a really strong formula. They're like, okay, like we're gonna kind of stick to this sort of songwriting.
Yeah, this is our sound. This is what we're gonna do. I don't know. For me, I feel like this is an underdog album. I feel like not as many people pay attention to this album.
Yeah.
And that's part of the charm for this album for me. I've always really liked the fact that, I don't know, this album has like a lot of hidden gems in it that I feel like get overlooked because people are so quick to look at Hyeana or, Juju or, like other albums. But Tinderbox kind of gets overlooked, and I feel like there's really strong mixing on this record. I feel like there's really strong songwriting on this record.
And the energy.
Yeah.
There's like a real like passion in this album. In fact, I think one of the biggest examples of that is the song Parties Fall. Love that song. I love the guitar dynamics and how the drums in it go together.
Yep. And I don't know, personally, I like the album art for this album a lot.
I do too, yeah. It's kind of cool.
Very surreal.
Yeah. I used to see that album like when I was younger and be like, what the heck is that?
Yep.
I always thought like something was wrong with the album cover because it looks like something went wrong with it, right? Like it's like red. It doesn't look intentionally done.
I don't know. I'm staring at it now. It happens every time I look at it. I just can't stop staring at it.
Yeah. Nice. So then you have songs like This Unrest, which I'm not the biggest fan of, but it definitely has that kind of punk, kind of fierce energy to it.
It does, but it still retains the Siouxsie Sioux vocal that never really seems to leave once they get to Juju.
Yeah. I know exactly what you're talking about. Yeah, kind of like that wailing sort of thing.
Yep, and that's one of the reasons that I don't like the first two albums is because they don't have that in any way.
I agree. I gotta say, one song I'm not really a fan of on this album is Cannons, and that's mostly just because of the lyrical content. I never really liked the vocal line in this song.
Yeah.
Okay, and I don't know if I'm crazy or not, but doesn't this song kind of sound like Spellbound?
Yeah, a little bit.
Yeah, right? And they keep on, like, this is another one of those songs where they keep on using arpeggios with 12-string guitars and pianos for parts of it, and then it does have, like, a super good bass line, though, but there's kind of an example of songs they're just repeating a lot of the same things or kind of working with what they already know is going to be successful.
Yeah.
And nothing wrong with it. But this song, I don't know, something off about this one. It's kind of hard to put into words.
Yeah, it's not my favorite song on the album, but then again, I didn't hate it either.
Yeah. That song 92 Degrees. It's not 98 degrees.
92.
92 degrees.
Must have been 92 when they wrote it.
Oh, I see. Yeah. It was just like a slower kind of song, and I think that this is the way they should do a lot of slower songs because it's really powerful.
And that's for as much as we talk about this album being formulaic, I almost kind of see it as being adventurous in some ways because you have songs like Cities in Dust and songs like 92, which represent things that they have done before, but they're done in a much different way, and I feel like in a better way.
Yeah, I would agree.
Not every song in this album is like that, but yeah.
But yeah, it does have these moments where it kind of tries to break out of it or experiment a little bit. But this is just kind of another stepping stone to what they were doing. These aren't giant, like this album I don't see as a giant leap.
Yeah.
When we did Kaleidoscope, I thought that was a huge leap for for this band. And when we did Juju, is that one where I felt like it was a really big leap. Kiss in the Dreamhouse, you could argue, is still kind of experimenting because, they're adding a lot of different kind of things like an orchestra and kind of moving with like these bigger kind of moving away from the guitar rock sort of thing. And with Hyeana and Tinderbox, I just feel like it wasn't as dramatic of a step at this point.
I would agree. I don't know. I've always liked this album. I can't quite put my finger on why I like this album more than Hyeana.
Okay.
But I do.
You do? Okay. That's fine.
But one thing I will say, I do think that they do a much better job of doing longer songs on this album than in previous albums.
Yeah.
Because they don't do a ton of long songs on their previous albums. And if you look at the track listing for this one, it's only 8 songs, and that's because we have quite a few 6-minute songs on here.
Yeah. This isn't a band that was like famous for doing super long songs. I mean, they were basically, you know, trying to make pop songs.
Yeah. But 6 minutes is a long pop song.
That's a long pop song. Yeah. So I agree. I think that they do it better than a lot of bands.
Yeah.
Like, especially some of the ones that we've talked about.
Yep.
where it gets a little boring. But I don't find myself getting bored by a lot of these songs.
No, actually, this is an album that I can frequently put on and I don't get bored listening to. And I think that's why I like this album so much. Maybe it's not the biggest risk for them.
Well, it's kind of like at this point, it's like a if it ain't broke, don't fix it kind of thing.
Yeah. But it's just, for me, like a really solid album. And I can put it on and I don't lose interest when I'm listening to this album.
Okay. So yeah, that's pretty much what I have to say about Tinderbox.
Yeah, I will say, because this is an often overlooked album, I just recommend that if you really haven't given this a thorough listen, that you do, because you might find some things on here that you haven't really appreciated before.
Yeah, and you're probably sick of Hyeana and Superstition.
Yep.
Okay, so this is 1987's Through the Looking Glass. It's a covers album.
Yep.
And while we normally wouldn't do a covers album, because usually that isn't like a very big deal for most bands.
For this band.
It was.
Yeah.
So it's kind of like how when David Bowie did Pinups, and that was a really big album for him, and a lot of people see it as like one of his main albums. And for Siouxsie and the Banshees, a lot of people see this as their next main album.
Yep.
You know, with a lot of other bands, if they do covers, it's not really, or they do an album of covers especially, it's not usually considered.
It's not considered canon.
Yeah, but with Siouxsie and the Banshees, for some reason it is, and I think it's because they really do their own kind of take on most of these songs.
Yeah.
And then also, it was a pretty big success, unlike most cover albums, which don't
usually fare quite as well.
Yeah, it's almost just like to tie the fans over.
Or it's like a project for the band that they really want to do.
Yeah, that's another thing. So with this, you do have a lot of really interesting covers, and I think that that's one of the reasons this album is actually pretty good.
That's actually why I like this album, is because it's a really bizarre release for them.
Yeah.
In terms of song choice and in terms of arrangement and instrumentation, like this album's all over the place.
Yeah. I also like too that for pretty much for every single song, they kind of make it like a little bit, not only put their own spin on it, but a lot of them they kind of not only pick like the creepiest songs for most of these artists, but they also kind of make it even more so creepy.
I completely agree.
Like, here, we have they're covering a Kraftwerk song.
Yep.
They do like a Bob Dylan song. They, of course, do The Passenger by Iggy Pop, which is probably the most famous thing on here. They do a Roxy Music song. And then, like, there's some other ones, but the other one I want to mention was they cover Trust in Me from The Jungle Book.
Yes.
The movie.
They covered the cartoon soundtrack song Trust in Me.
Yeah, from the 1967 Disney movie.
Yeah,
the animated one, not the new one.
So in the movie, you know, the snake sings this when he's like hypnotizing the little boy.
Yeah, Mowgli.
It's kind of creepy when the movie happens, but it's a Disney movie, so it can't be that creepy.
Yeah, but then she really kind of ramps it up. Like it's really, really.
You really feel like you're being misled when she sings "Trust in Me."
Yeah. So I think a lot of this stuff is really good. You know, Strange Fruit. Okay, like Strange Fruit and Sea Breezes are probably my favorite on this, other than Trust in Me.
Yeah.
One is because I really like Roxy Music, and I really like Billie Holiday. I especially like the Roxy Music, like Sea Breezes cover.
Yeah.
But the one song that I just have never understood why people like it so much is The Passenger.
Yeah.
And I just have never really liked that cover. And
I think it's just because it's already a good song.
Maybe that's it. I don't know. It's weird because I only like one specific version of that song. It's not even, I don't even like the original album version. It's like some weird like live version that I like of The Passenger. And I think it's really good that they experimented with that song because they have like horns and all stuff. And it does have a very unique sound. In fact, a lot of the instrumentation on this, they really play around with.
That's what I liked. Well, see, I can understand why you wouldn't like that song.
Mm-hmm.
I do enjoy it, but it's more like it fulfills this bizarre fetish for me.
Yeah.
And that I like, really strange arrangements of songs. And this album is just chock full of them.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Every single song definitely has the Siouxsie and the Banshees spin.
Yep.
I totally love what they did with it. I think it was a good choice to do this kind of album. It really broke up what they were kind of getting used to almost in terms of their sound.
Yeah.
And it was probably a lot of fun to do this.
No, I completely agree. And I like that they did the John Cale cover on here too.
Yeah.
I thought that was kind of cool. And I don't know. Most of the songs that they picked were not most of them were not smash singles by whatever band they did.
There's almost most of them are kind of classics in a way. They would just had become famous over time.
Yeah.
And yeah, because Iggy Pop wasn't making millions off of The Passenger.
No, definitely not. That's kind of when I feel like cover albums can be a big success, is when you take songs that people wouldn't necessarily listen to and you put your spin on them and market them in such a way that it really kind of changes those songs altogether. That's when a cover becomes really successful.
Yeah.
It has nothing to do with goth music, but it's just when the Black Crowes, did Hard to Handle, a huge Otis Redding song, but no one listens to that song by Otis Redding. It's not Otis Redding's most famous song. It's probably his least famous song.
Yeah.
But because the Black Crowes covered it, it became a famous Otis Redding song.
Huh. Yeah. Also reminds me of how when David Bowie covered Iggy Pop's, I think it was China Girl.
Yeah.
And then Iggy Pop, he was struggling really hard, and because he got the royalty check.
Yep.
And then he could retire for a while.
Yeah, because China Girl was a huge hit.
So that just reminds, especially since they did, obviously, Siouxsie mentioned The Passenger on this album.
Stevie Ray Vaughan played on this song.
And China Girl?
Yeah.
Oh, I didn't know that. Weird.
Yep.
So, some David Bowie trivia.
Yep.
But, yeah, I think this was a good album all the way around. There's not too much trivia. I mean, they just decided to do a covers album, I guess, and it has their sort of sound.
It does.
Don't like the cover of this album.
No, I'll agree with you on that. I was about to mention that. As far as covers go for Siouxsie and the Banshees, it's kind of a weird one. It's I don't know what to think of it, really. It's again one of those things where I'm I'm not strongly opposed to it, but it doesn't really do anything for me either.
It's just kind of very 80s.
Yeah. And it's just all their eyes.
Looks like something you would see in a fashion salon in the early 90s.
Or a t-shirt that Siouxsie Sue would wear.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Yeah. So that's Through the Looking Glass.
Yep.
All right, this has been Gothcast. As always, we'd love to hear your input on any of these albums. This was kind of a strange one to do just because of the place in this band's catalog that these albums sit. Very established by this point, and kind of a little bit more similar than their earlier works have been. But if you have anything you'd like to tell us, then you can, of course, contact us through many different means.
Yeah, and so as we always do, we got to plug our social media. And so we have an Instagram, it's called Gothcast, Facebook, it's called Gothcast, YouTube channel, Gothcast Space Video, website, gothcastradio.com, no www, we've done away with all that nonsense.
Yep.
And we have a Gmail account, gothcastradio@gmail.com.
Yep.
And you can reach us at any of those mediums, and we're always happy to respond. In fact, a few fans have reached out and sent us messages and things, and we're always very quick to respond to things.
Yeah.
If you're one of those people, you know that. Otherwise, just take our word for it.
Yeah. So, you can also search us on iTunes. So it's just Gothcast.
Yeah. And for those of you who haven't seen our iTunes page, I recommend you check it out.
Yeah. So, we just finally got it working the way we wanted to. So.
Yeah. It looks nice and fresh, and
yep.
It's all it's very clean.
Yeah.
And if you could leave a review, that'd be awesome. And as always, we could use more subscribers.
Of course. But thanks for listening. I'm Dr. Sanders.
I'm Robbie Gore.
And stay spooky.